Ladies and gentlemen, warm greetings to you. It's really a great pleasure for me to participate in the Brussels Telecommunications and Media Forum to share with you UNESCO's thoughts and actions on artificial intelligence. Considerations regarding these technologies are a really important topic and one that keeps growing in relevance as these artificial intelligence technologies are at the cutting edge in transforming the world and the way we live. Nowadays, AI plays a key role in billions of people's lives. It affects our economies, our social outcomes, our health, our culture, our political discourse, our environment. Sometimes unnoticed, but often with profound consequences, AI transforms our societies and challenges what it means to be human. Maximizing the opportunities for positive impact arising out of artificial intelligence, or simply AI, is high on the international agenda. AI can provide millions of students with support to complete secondary education, fill an additional 3.3 million jobs worldwide, and more urgently, artificial intelligence can help us tackle the spread and the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, it already did, through the role smart algorithms have played in vaccine discovery, in contact tracing, and in other pandemic control mechanisms. It is estimated that AI can add 4 trillion in value to global markets by the end of this year. The value artificial intelligence is capable of generating is only growing as AI-based applications are further developed, enriched, and deployed in more and more sectors, and for an increasing variety of purposes. We don't realize how big are our data footprints and to what extent algorithms built on this data affect our lives. Let me just share a few examples with you. Search engine algorithms help us access the information we want on the World Wide Web, personalizing results on the basis of a user's location, gender, language, search history, and other data trails. Job matching algorithms analyze people's competencies to show employers suitable candidates for employment. On-demand streaming platforms provide tailored music and movie suggestions based on users' viewing patterns and offer advertisers the ability to predict and nudge our attitudes and actions. Algorithms help judges determine the possibility of recidivism and suggest duration of prison sentences. Credit risk algorithms decide who should be offered a loan and on what terms and conditions. These examples show how deeply AI affects our lives. However, along with these tremendous advantages in increasing efficiency, AI technologies also generate downside risks and challenges. These risks are derived from their malicious use sometimes, as well as from how they can also lead to deepening inequalities and divides. These divides exist between countries that have different levels of technological capacities. AI has a winner-takes-all dynamic and needs to be regulated. Concentration of artificial intelligence in the hands of few high-income countries will likely leave developing countries far behind. The latter will not benefit or benefit very little from AI technologies and will lack ownership of such technologies. Divides are being entrenched also within countries between social groups affected differently by AI applications. For example, we know the role artificial intelligence-based algorithms play in the spread of misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech in social media platforms, polarizing societies and weakening social cohesion. We know how artificial intelligence is entrenching gender divides, for example, with the best-paying jobs in AI development and use going to men due to the increasing use of artificial intelligence in the recruitment of human resources. Only 22% of all AI professionals are women. Because they are underrepresented in the industry, gender biases and stereotyping are being reproduced in AI technologies as well. It is not a coincidence the virtual personal assistants, such as Siri, Alexa, or Cortana, are female by default. The servility and sometimes submissiveness they express are an example of how AI can continue to reinforce and spread gender bias in our societies. The negative impacts of artificial intelligence, intended or unintended, are the reason why we need international and national policies and regulatory frameworks to ensure that artificial intelligence benefits humanity as a whole, leaving no one behind. AI is already in our lives, directing our choices, often in ways which can be harmful. What we need then is human-centered AI. Artificial intelligence must be developed and deployed for the greater good of humanity. UNESCO is working exactly for that. Our mandate is to build inclusive knowledge societies centered on our efforts to promote human rights-based, open, accessible, multi-stakeholder-driven development and use of AI technologies to ensure that we harness the opportunities and mitigate the risks brought about by digital technologies such as artificial intelligence. AI and its constitutive elements of data, algorithms, hardware, connectivity, and storage exponentially increase the power of information and communication technologies. This is a major opportunity for sustainable development with concomitant risks that also need to be addressed. And to steer artificial intelligence accordingly, we need to recognize the uneven but dynamic distribution of AI power across multiple and dispersed centers within governments, the private sector, the technical community, civil society, and other stakeholders worldwide. It is paramount that we take action for the development of regulatory and ethical policy frameworks. There are some legislative vacuums around the industry which need to be filled fast. The first step was to agree on exactly which values need to be enshrined and which rules need to be enforced. UNESCO had mapped over 170 AI frameworks and guidelines, but they are implemented unevenly and none were global in scope. AI is global, which is why we need a global instrument to regulate it. UNESCO has long played a leading role in international standard setting and cooperation, and our member states have now recognized the need for us to develop ethical principles for artificial intelligence. In this way, we can help to ensure that technological development is aligned with a human-centered vision, with human rights being respected and sustainable development being advanced. That is why UNESCO engaged in analysis and reflections on artificial intelligence, including from the basis of our mandate to promote freedom of expression and build inclusive knowledge societies. This mission applied to UNESCO's work around not only artificial intelligence, but also to developments such as the Internet of Things, blockchain, biometrics, and algorithm decision-making. While we examined opportunities, we also sought to identify and mitigate risks such as those posed by arbitrary and bulk surveillance profiling and violations of privacy and equality. UNESCO successfully responded to the need recognized by member states. On 24 November 2021, the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence was adopted by the 41st session of UNESCO's General Conference. This was the culmination of a 2-year process to elaborate this first global standard-setting instrument on the ethics of artificial intelligence following the decision of UNESCO's General Conference in 2019. In 2020, the focus was on preparing the draft text for the recommendation with the assistance of an ad hoc expert group formed by 24 renowned specialists with multidisciplinary and pluralistic expertise on the ethics of artificial intelligence. This phase included inclusive and multidisciplinary consultations with a wide range of stakeholders. These broad consultations were extremely important to ensure that the text could be as inclusive as possible, taking the perspectives of all stakeholders into consideration. Towards the end of 2020 and in 2021, the focus was on an intergovernmental process and negotiations on the draft text that produced a final version of the recommendation. The preliminary report and the first draft of the recommendation were transmitted to member states in September 2020 for their written comments by 31st of December the same year. These written comments were taken into account by the UNESCO Director General Audrey Azoulay when preparing her final report on the recommendation. after months of constructive dialogue and negotiation, representatives from UNESCO's member states agreed on the draft text of an ambitious and wide-ranging new template for the ethical development and deployment of artificial intelligence. UNESCO's work on the recommendation is emphasized that at the time, no global instrument covered all the fields that guide the development and application of AI in a human-centered approach. The recommendation, then, seeks to ensure that all AI technologies improve the quality of life for everyone. It provides for concrete measures to address their downsides and propose solutions to current and unanticipated problems. The recommendation considers that artificial intelligence technologies can be of great service to humanity and that all countries can benefit from them, but that they also raise fundamental ethical concerns, for instance, regarding the biases that they can embed and exacerbate, potentially resulting in discrimination, inequality, digital divides, exclusion, and a threat to cultural, social, and biological diversity and socio-economic divides. The need for transparency and understandability of the workings of algorithms and the data with which they have been trained, and their potential impact on, and including but not limited to, human dignity, human rights, fundamental freedoms, gender equality, democracy, social, economic, political, and cultural processes, scientific and engineering practices, animal welfare, and the environment and ecosystems. The recommendation that was approved and adopted aims to realize the advantages AI brings to society and reduce the risks it entails. It ensures that digital transformations promote human rights and contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, addressing issues around transparency, accountability, and privacy, with action-oriented policy chapters on data governance, education, culture, labor, healthcare, and the economy. The document defines artificial intelligence systems in the following way: as information processing technologies that integrate models and algorithms that produce a capacity to learn and to perform cognitive tasks, leading to outcomes such as predictions and decision-making in material and virtual environments. AI systems are designed to operate with varying degrees of autonomy by means of knowledge modeling and representation, and by exploiting data and calculating correlations. The recommendation considers that ethical questions regarding AI systems pertain to all stages of the AI system's life cycle, from research, design, and development to deployment and use, including maintenance, operations, trade, financing, monitoring and evaluation, validation, end of use, disassembly, and termination. The document addresses AI ethics issues in all domains to which these technologies are applied, but pays specific attention to the broad ethical implications of AI systems in relation to the central domains of UNESCO: education, science, culture, and communications and information. The recommendation is addressed to member states, both as AI actors and as authorities responsible for developing legal and regulatory frameworks throughout the entire AI system lifecycle, and for promoting business responsibility. But it also provides ethical guidance to all AI actors, including the public and private sectors, by providing a basis for an ethical impact assessment of AI systems throughout their lifecycle. The objectives of the recommendation are the following: to provide a universal framework for values, principles, and actions that guide states in the formulation of their legislation, policies, and other instruments regarding AI in consistency with international law; to guide the actions of individuals, groups, communities, institutions, and private sector companies to ensure that embedding of ethics in all stages of the AI lifecycle system; to protect, promote, and respect human rights and fundamental freedoms, human dignity and equality, including gender equality; to safeguard the interests of present and future generations, to preserve the environment, biodiversity, and ecosystems, and to respect cultural diversity in all stages of the AI system lifecycle; to foster multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary, and pluralistic dialogue and consensus building about ethical issues related to AI systems. To promote equitable access to developments and knowledge in the field of AI and the sharing of benefits, with particular attention to the needs and contributions of low and middle-income countries, including least developed countries, landlocked countries, and small island developing states. Having agreed that AI technologies are not value neutral, the recommendation took the approach of identifying foundational values and closely interlinked principles, which inform further outlined policy actions. Foundational values have a role of necessary preconditions or prerequisites for principles and policy actions to actually work. Taken together, they form a coherent framework to ensure ethical artificial intelligence. The recommendation has identified the values of human dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, leaving no one behind, living in harmony, trustworthiness, and protection of the environment. The latter has been purposefully elevated to the level of values because the analysis of various documents proposing principles for AI has shown that the protection of the environment receives very little attention or maybe even is overlooked. So the issues and the values that we talk about are respect, protection, and promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms and human dignity, environment and ecosystem flourishing, ensuring diversity and inclusiveness, living in peaceful, just, and interconnected societies. Those are the 4 values that are the north of the recommendation. The recommendation then has recognized that there is an emerging convergence around the importance of certain principles that allow ensuring ethical approaches within the AI lifecycle. And on that basis, the recommendation includes such commonly recognized principles as human oversight, privacy, fairness, transparency and explainability, safety and security, responsibility and accountability, and others. Apart from that, the recommendation proposed new principles which have not been previously seen elsewhere, such as proportionality, which helps ensuring that the AI methods used correspond to the aims, do not bear excessive risks, and are appropriate to the context in which they are deployed. So, let's go over these principles. Proportionality and do no harm. The choice to use AI systems and which AI method to use should be justified in the following ways. The AI method chosen should be appropriate and proportional to achieve a given legitimate aim. The AI method chosen should not infringe upon the foundational values captured in the document, and in particular, its use must not violate or abuse human rights. And third, the AI method should be appropriate to the context and should be based on rigorous scientific foundation. A second principle is safety and security. Unwanted harms, such as safety risks, as well as vulnerabilities to attack, security risks, should be avoided and should be addressed and prevented and eliminated throughout the entire AI system lifecycle. A third principle is fairness and non-discrimination. AI actors should promote social justice and safeguard fairness and non-discrimination of any kind in compliance with international law. This implies an inclusive approach to ensuring that the benefits of AI technologies are available and accessible to all, taking into consideration the specific needs of different age groups, cultural systems, different language groups, persons with disabilities, girls and women, and disadvantaged, marginalized, and vulnerable people or people in vulnerable situations. AI actors should make every reasonable effort to minimize and avoid reinforcing or perpetuating discriminatory or biased applications and outcomes throughout the entire life cycle of the AI system. And digital and knowledge divides within and between countries need to be addressed throughout the AI system life cycle as well, including in terms of access and the quality of access to technology and to data. A third principle is sustainability. Assessment of human, social, cultural, economic, and environmental impact of AI technologies should be carried out. Fourth principle, right to privacy and data protection. Data for AI systems should be collected, used, shared, archived, and deleted in ways that are consistent with international law and in line with the values and principles set forth in this recommendation, while respecting relevant national, regional, and international legal frameworks. Another principle is human oversight and determination. This means that it's always possible to attribute ethical and legal responsibility for any stage of the AI cycle of the AI systems, as well as in the cases of remedy related to AI systems, to physical persons, or to existing legal entities. Transparency, or enable people to understand how each stage of an AI system is put in place, appropriate to the context and sensitivity of AI systems, and explainability, or making intelligent and providing insight, intelligible and providing insight into the outcome of AI systems is another principle. People should be fully informed when a decision is informed by or is made on the basis of AI algorithms, including when it affects their safety or human rights, and particularly in those cases and in those circumstances, should have the opportunity to request explanatory information from the relevant AI actor or public sector institution. Another principle is the responsibility and accountability. Appropriate oversight, impact assessment, audit, and due diligence mechanisms, including whistleblower protections, should be developed to ensure accountability for AI and their impact throughout their life cycle. Both technical and institutional designs should ensure auditability and traceability of decision processes. Awareness and literacy is another principle. Public awareness and understanding of AI technologies and the value of data should be promoted through open and accessible education, civic engagement, digital skills, and AI ethics training, media and information literacy, and training in all those. Another principle is multi-stakeholder and adaptive governance and collaboration. Participation of different stakeholders throughout the AI system lifecycle is necessary for inclusive approaches to AI governance, enabling the benefits to be shared by all and to contribute to sustainable development. In view of implementing values and principles, the recommendation has proposed a number of concrete policy actions which span from promoting diversity and inclusiveness to mitigating negative impacts on society, culture, and the environment. So let me give you a few examples of the four concrete policy actions. Ethical impact assessment. To identify and assess benefits, concerns, and risks of AI systems, as well as appropriate risk prevention, mitigation, and monitoring measures. AI systems identified as potential risks to human rights should be broadly tested by AI actors, including in real-world conditions if needed, as part of the ethical impact assessment before such systems are released in the market. Ethical governance and stewardship is another policy item. AI governance mechanisms should be inclusive, transparent, multidisciplinary, multilateral, including the possibility of mitigation and redress of harm across borders, and multi-stakeholder. A third policy area, data policy. Develop data governance strategies that ensure the continuous evaluation of the quality of training data for AI systems, including the adequacy of the data collection and selection processes, proper data security and protection measures, as well as feedback mechanisms to learn from mistakes and share best practices among all actors. Another policy area is the development of international cooperation. We must provide platforms for international collaboration on AI for development, including by contributing expertise, funding, data, domain knowledge, infrastructure, and facilitating multi-stakeholder collaboration to tackle challenging development problems, and promote international collaboration on AI research and innovation, including research and innovation centers and networks that promote greater participation and leadership of researchers from everywhere. Another policy area is on environment and ecosystems. Member states and business enterprises should assess the direct and indirect environmental impact throughout the AI system life cycle, including but not limited to its carbon footprint, energy consumption, environmental impact of raw material extraction for supporting the manufacturing of AI technologies, and reduce the environmental impact of AI systems and data infrastructures. Gender. To fully maximize the potential of digital technologies and artificial intelligence to contribute to achieving gender equality. That's a policy area for us. So, this recommendation, essentially, in a nutshell, is about protecting data. It calls for actions beyond what tech firms and governments are going to guarantee individuals more protection by ensuring transparency, agency, and control over their personal data. It states that individuals should all be able to access or even erase records of their own personal data. It also includes actions to improve data protection and an individual's knowledge of and the right to control their own data. It also increases the ability of regulatory bodies around the world to enforce this mechanism. A second area, banning social scoring and mass surveillance. The recommendation explicitly bans the use of AI systems for social scoring and mass surveillance. These types of technologies are very invasive. They infringe on human rights and fundamental freedoms, and they are used in a broad way. The recommendation stresses that when developing regulatory frameworks, member states should consider that ultimate responsibility and accountability must always lie with humans, and that AI technologies should not be given legal personality themselves. A third element, helping to monitor and evaluate. The recommendation sets the ground for tools that will assist in its implementation. Ethical impact assessments is intended to help countries and companies in developing and deploying AI systems to assess the impact of those systems on individuals, on societies, and on the environment. Readiness assessment methodology helps member states to assess how ready they are in terms of legal and technical infrastructure. This tool will support the enhancement of institutional capacity of countries and recommend appropriate measures to be taken in order to ensure that ethics are implemented in practice and are upfront in decision-making. In addition, the recommendation encourages member states to consider adding the role of an independent AI ethics officer or some other mechanisms to oversee auditing and continuous monitoring efforts. And finally, protecting the environment. The recommendation emphasizes that AI actors should favor data, energy, and resource efficient AI methods that will help ensure that AI becomes a more prominent tool in the fight against climate change and on tackling environmental issues. The recommendation asks governments to assess the direct and indirect environmental impact throughout the AI system lifecycle. This includes its carbon footprint, energy consumption, environmental impact, and so on. Incentivizes governments to invest in green tech, and if there are disproportionate negative impacts of AI systems on the environment, the recommendation instructs that they should not be used. UNESCO is now fully engaged in implementation of the recommendation. Just as examples of our involvement, UNESCO is a co-champion of artificial intelligence of the UN Secretary-General's High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation, an observer in the European Commission High-Level Expert Group on Artificial Intelligence, and in the Council of Europe Ad Hoc Committee on Artificial Intelligence, a member of the OECD Expert Group on Artificial Intelligence, a partner of the International Telecommunication Union AI for Good Global Summit, and more recently, an observer in the Global Partnership on AI with OECD and almost 20 member states, as well as participant in other intergovernmental forums. So our role is set, our pathway is set. So let's all work together to make sure that AI technologies are promoting public good, promoting good for all humanity, and mitigating all the risks that they can bring, particularly being ethical systems that can help really promotes sustainable development everywhere. So thank you very much for your attention.